When things blew up with my parents, I found myself scrambling for a place to stay. I couldn't keep crashing on friends' couches forever, so I started scrolling through every app and website I could find, desperate for something affordable. That's when I stumbled across Luke's ad. He was renting a room in his 3-bedroom house for just $1,000 a month. Honestly, a steal for the area. What really caught my eye, though, was that Luke made it clear he wouldn't be around much. He claimed he was out of the house most of the time, so whoever rented the room would have the place mostly to themselves. I couldn't pass it up. I went to check the house out in person, and Luke opened the door with this quiet, awkward energy. He seemed harmless enough, maybe a bit of a recluse, but nothing too concerning. The house itself was nice, a 1-story layout with an open kitchen and living area. It felt comfortable. But as he showed me around, he mentioned some strange rules. No parties, no big gatherings, and absolutely no going into the attic or basement. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was desperate, and the price was too good. So, a few days later, I packed up what little I had and moved in. That was the beginning of my nightmare. At first, things seemed normal enough. The room I was renting came fully furnished, and Luke even gave me a key to lock my door when I wasn't home. It felt like a thoughtful gesture, and for the first week, I convinced myself I'd made the right choice. But soon, little things started to feel off. Despite what Luke had said about being gone most of the time, his car was always in the driveway. Even when I got home late from work, he was there. I'd hear him moving around the house at all hours, footsteps creaking through the hallways, doors softly opening and closing. Sometimes it was subtle, barely noticeable above the hum of the TV. Other times it was impossible to ignore. I could hear him walking back and forth as if pacing long into the night. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up needing to use the bathroom. As I walked down the hallway, something stopped me cold. The basement door. It was wide open. Luke had made it clear the basement was off limits. Yet here it was, gaping into darkness. A faint light flickered from deep within, casting eerie shadows up the staircase. Then I heard it, loud banging, almost frantic, echoing from down below. Curiosity tugged at me. I took a step closer, trying to peer into the depths of the basement. The smell hit me first. Damp, stale, like something rotting. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Just then, Luke appeared at the bottom of the stairs. His face was half hidden in shadow, but I could see his eyes, cold and furious as they locked onto me. "Shut the door," he growled, his voice low and strained. I stammered an apology, my throat tight with fear, and quickly did as he said. Back in my room, I lay awake for hours, replaying the moment over and over in my head. What the hell was he doing down there in the middle of the night? Things only spiraled from there. I started coming home to find my bedroom door unlocked, despite the fact that I always locked it when I left. At first, I thought I was imagining it, maybe I'd forgotten. But then I noticed small changes in my room. My clothes had been moved, drawers left slightly ajar. Someone had been rifling through my stuff. I confronted Luke about it the next time I saw him, but he flat out denied everything. He even went so far as to claim that I had the only key to my room. His blank expression as he lied to my face sent a chill down my spine. I knew, without a doubt, that he was the one sneaking into my room. But what could I do? I was stuck there, and something told me this was just the beginning. One evening, I came home to find something I hadn't seen in weeks. Luke's car was gone. It was the first time I'd been alone in the house, and immediately my mind drifted back to the basement. I had to know what he was hiding down there. I grabbed my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and crept down the creaky basement stairs. The smell hit me again, even worse than before, like sewage, but thicker, heavier. It clung to the air, making my stomach turn. The basement itself was mostly empty, just a few boxes taped shut and scattered around. But my attention was drawn to a door in the corner. It was locked, and the smell seemed to be coming from behind it. I stood there for a moment, debating whether or not to try and open it. But something deep inside me screamed not to. Whatever was behind that door, it wasn't meant to be seen. I backed away slowly, taking one last sweep of the basement before heading upstairs and shutting the door behind me, my heart racing the whole way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, tossing and turning, trying to push the image of that locked door out of my mind. I must have dozed off at some point, but something startled me awake. The room was dark, the kind of thick, oppressive darkness that makes you feel like you're suffocating. At first, I couldn't figure out why I'd woken up, until I felt it, a presence. I rolled over slowly, my heart in my throat, and that's when I saw him. Luke was standing beside my bed, his face inches from mine, his eyes wide and staring. I screamed, scrambling back, but he raised a finger to his lips and whispered, "Shh, did you go into the basement?" My blood ran cold. I lied, shaking my head violently. "No, I didn't." He didn't move. He just stood there, his expression unreadable, and asked again, "Are you sure?" I was shaking so hard, I thought I might pass out. "Yes, I'm sure," I stammered. He ignored me, as if my answer didn't even matter. He straightened up and turned toward the door. As he reached for the handle, he paused and said over his shoulder, "I think you should find other living arrangements." The second he left the room, I sprang out of bed and started packing. I wasn't staying another second in that house. My hands trembled as I stuffed my things into bags, but I couldn't leave without confronting him one last time. I stormed down the hall, knocking hard on his door and demanding he give me some of my rent money back. For a moment, there was silence. Then the door creaked open, just a crack, and Luke's arm reached out, holding a small stack of $100 bills. He didn't say a word, just handed me the money. $400, not even half of what I'd paid. But I didn't care. I grabbed it and got out of there as fast as I could. I slept in my car that night, parked in some random lot. Too shaken to think about where to go next, the next morning I went back to my parents' house, tail between my legs, and explained everything. Whatever was going on in that basement, whatever Luke was hiding, I didn't want to know. I'm just thankful I got out before I found out. It was my junior year of college when I decided to move off campus into a student apartment building. My roommate Daniel was assigned to me by the school, just another guy in need of a place to stay. At first, everything seemed fine. Daniel was friendly, always smiling, and polite enough. We made small talk in the kitchen, and he even helped me move some of my things in. On the surface, he seemed like a pretty decent guy. But after a few days, I started noticing little things that felt off. Daniel had this habit of lingering in my room longer than necessary. He'd come in, sit on the edge of my bed, and ask questions that felt way too personal for someone I'd just met. Stuff about my family, my relationships, things he had no business knowing. Worse, he had this unnerving way of casually poking around my belongings, like he had a right to know what was mine. It felt weird, invasive even, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just curious. Maybe I was overthinking it. Then, the noises started. Every night, without fail, I'd hear strange sounds coming from Daniel's room, low murmurs, like he was talking to someone, and shuffling as if he was pacing back and forth. I told myself it was nothing, probably just him watching TV or chatting on the phone. But as the days passed, I realized the whispers never seemed to stop. No matter how late it was, the odd murmurings continued, sending an uneasy chill through me every time I lay in bed, trying to sleep. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One night, the noises from Daniel's room were louder than usual. The low murmur of his voice crawled through the walls, making it impossible to sleep. It was the same eerie whispering, the kind that gnaws at your nerves. I had to know what he was doing in there. I crept out of bed, careful not to make a sound as I padded down the hallway. When I reached Daniel's door, I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear. His voice was low, too low for me to make out any words, but it was definitely him, whispering to himself. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was almost suffocating. I held my breath, heart pounding in my chest. I was just about to pull away when I heard it. Daniel's voice, clear as day, saying my name, John. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. Did he know I was there? How could he have known? I hurried back to my room, practically diving into bed, trying to make sense of it all. The rest of the night I lay awake, my mind racing. Had Daniel heard me, or was it just some strange coincidence? Either way, it didn't sit right with me. Over the next few days, things only got worse. Daniel began to act even stranger. He started staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Long, unsettling glances that made my skin crawl. His movements, once casual, now seemed calculated, furtive. I would catch him watching me from the corner of his eye, or hear him muttering something under his breath when he passed me in the kitchen. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of whispering again. This time it wasn't coming from his room, it was right outside my door. My heart hammered in my chest as I strained to listen. I crept toward the door and pressed my ear against it, just like I had before. The whispering stopped, and then, for the second time, I heard Daniel say my name, John. I swallowed hard, and in a shaky voice I called out, "Yeah, you good?" But there was no response, just the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. Back toward his room, I barely slept that night. The next evening, things took an even darker turn. I woke up in the middle of the night to the soft asterisk, click, asterisk of my bedroom door closing. I froze, my eyes wide in the dark. I heard the faint sound of footsteps outside, moving away. Daniel had been in my room. He'd been standing over me while I slept. The next day, I confronted him. I asked if he had ever been known to sleepwalk, trying to play it off casually. At first, he looked thrown off, like he didn't know what to say. Then, after a long pause, he finally nodded. "Yeah, I sleepwalk sometimes," he said. But his tone was off. Too rehearsed, too calculated. Something about his answer felt wrong. I could tell he was hiding something. My gut told me this wasn't just sleepwalking. Daniel was up to something far more sinister, and I was running out of time to figure out what it was. The fear gnawed at me day and night until I couldn't take it anymore. Daniel's strange behavior, the whispering, the way he stared at me, it all pointed to something far darker than sleepwalking. One afternoon, when I knew he'd be out of the apartment for a few hours, I made up my mind. I had to know what he was hiding. I slipped into his room, my heart racing in my chest. The space looked ordinary enough at first glance: neatly made bed, cluttered desk, and clothes thrown haphazardly into an open closet. I started with his desk drawers, rummaging through notebooks, papers, and random clutter, but nothing seemed unusual. Frustrated, I turned to the closet, pushing aside hangers and piles of clothes. Then, tucked away in the back corner, I found a small, unmarked drawer. My fingers trembled as I pulled it open. Inside were stacks of photographs, dozens of them. As I flipped through the first few, my heart sank. They were all of me. Photos of me sleeping in my bed, taken from different angles. Some of the shots were so close up that I could see every detail of my face, the rise and fall of my chest, and the way my hair was sprawled across the pillow. I felt sick to my stomach. He had been sneaking into my room, standing over me while I slept, capturing these grotesque, intimate moments without my knowledge. And then I saw the others. Mixed in with the photos of me were pictures of another guy, someone around my age. He was asleep too, captured from the same creepy, invasive angles. I stared at his face, trying to make sense of it. He had to have been Daniel's former roommate. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Daniel had done this before. I wasn't his first victim. I couldn't breathe. My pulse raced as I snapped a picture of the drawer's contents with my phone and stuffed a few of the photos into my pocket as evidence. I didn't know what Daniel's intentions were, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. Without thinking, I rushed back to my room, throwing clothes into a suitcase. barely able to keep my hands from shaking. I needed to get out, and fast. The next day, I went straight to the student housing department, dumping the photos on the desk and explaining everything. They promised to take action, though their calm demeanor didn't match the terror I felt inside. Thankfully, I was reassigned to a different apartment immediately, with a new roommate who was, by all accounts, normal. I never spoke to Daniel again. He disappeared from my life as quickly as he had come into it, but I could never forget. Even now, years later, the memory of those chilling photographs lingers in my mind. The whispering in the night, the slow click of my bedroom door closing, the knowledge that he had been watching me while I slept. It haunts me. And as for the other guy in those photos, I never found out what happened to him. But I have this sinking feeling I'm not the only one who discovered Daniel's secret. When I was 24, I had to move out of state for a new job. It was a huge step for me, exciting but also a bit nerve-wracking. I'd never lived that far from home, and on top of that, I needed to find a place that wouldn't drain my savings. So, I posted ads on every platform I could think of. Facebook, Craigslist, even the subreddit for the town I was moving to. I didn't expect much, but within a few days, I got a message from a guy named Rob. Rob said he had a room available in his house. At first, I was a little hesitant. I wasn't sure about living with a guy I didn't know, but I checked out his Facebook profile, and he seemed pretty normal. He had pictures with friends at barbecues, just typical stuff. My parents weren't thrilled about it, of course. They warned me about living with strangers, especially men, but I figured I could handle myself. Besides, I was on a budget, and this seemed like a good opportunity. Rob and I ended up doing a FaceTime call so he could give me a virtual tour of the house. It was modest, but cozy, just a small, one-story house right in the middle of the town. It was also only about 10 minutes from my new job, which was perfect. Rob seemed nice during the call, too. He was friendly, but not overly so, and his rent was fair. He said the room was available immediately, which worked out perfectly for my timeline. Everything seemed to fall into place. A week later, I packed up my things and made the drive. Rob met me outside, handing me the key with a welcoming smile. I noticed right away he was a lot shorter than I expected, which threw me off a bit. But it didn't seem like a big deal. He helped me carry my bags in, showed me the room, and gave me some space to settle in. It was already furnished, but I replaced the bed sheets and pillows with my own, just to feel more comfortable. As I unpacked, Rob hung around, making small talk. He was nice, but I couldn't shake a slight feeling of discomfort. It was subtle, nothing I could put my finger on, but I shrugged it off. After all, it was probably just the nerves of starting over in a new town. Little did I know, this would be the start of something far more unsettling than I could have ever imagined. At first, everything seemed fine. Rob was a bit more friendly than I expected, always trying to chat when I got home from work or offering to drive me around town, but I figured he was just trying to be welcoming. I didn't mind too much until things started to get a little off. It was small at first, little things that seemed harmless on their own. I'd come home and find the TV on when I was sure I'd turned it off, or my shoes moved from where I'd left them by the door. I brushed it off, telling myself that maybe I just wasn't paying attention. But a few days in, something happened that I couldn't ignore. I was doing laundry and noticed my hamper didn't look the way I left it, like someone had rummaged through it. At first I thought I was being paranoid, but when I went to toss my clothes in the wash, I realized one of my underwear was missing. Panic set in. I tore my room apart, searching every corner, hoping I'd somehow misplaced it. But it was gone. A sickening thought crossed my mind. Asterisk, asterisk. What if Rob... I couldn't bring myself to believe it, but the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Still, I didn't confront him. Instead, I decided to install a lock on my bedroom door. I felt like I needed some privacy, some security, even if I was overreacting. I waited until Rob was out, and then swapped the old doorknob with one I bought at the hardware store. It wasn't much, but I felt safer knowing he couldn't just walk into my room whenever he wanted. That peace didn't last long, though. That night, around 1:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by loud banging on my door. Rob was outside, angrily calling my name, demanding I open up. My heart pounded in my chest as I lay there, frozen in bed, pretending to be asleep. I could hear the frustration in his voice, and the fact that he was pounding on my door in the middle of the night terrified me. How did he even know I changed the lock? Had he tried to come into my room? The next morning, I woke up to a string of texts from him. We need to talk. Be home after work. The sinking feeling in my stomach only deepened. When I got home, Rob confronted me, demanding I remove the lock. He was furious, but trying to mask it under a calm tone, saying it was his house, and I needed to respect his rules. I tried to explain that, as a woman, I just felt safer with the lock, but he wouldn't hear it. He insisted the old doorknob had to go back on, leaving me uneasy and questioning how long this living arrangement could last. A few days later, the situation took a sharp turn for the worse. Rob wasn't home, and I was getting ready to leave for work when there was a knock at the door. A girl, about my age, was standing on the porch, her expression serious. "Are you living here with Rob?" she asked. I nodded, confused. Her eyes widened, and she leaned in closer, speaking in a hushed but urgent tone. "You need to get out of here. Now. Rob's dangerous. He has restraining orders against him. He stalks women." My blood ran cold. I was speechless, just standing there, trying to process what she was telling me. She explained that she knew about him because she'd been one of his victims. She had seen me move in and waited for a chance to warn me when he wasn't home. Everything she told me confirmed my worst fears. I felt sick, terrified, and completely trapped. I thanked her, my hands shaking, and watched her leave before rushing back inside. I immediately started packing, frantically throwing my things into bags. I couldn't stay another night in that house. I reached out to a new listing I'd found for a studio apartment across town and prayed I could move in quickly. The girl on the other end said I could move in as soon as possible. It was the lifeline I needed. Now all I had to do was get out without Rob noticing. But I had no idea just how much worse things were about to get. That night, Rob came home, his usual fake smile plastered across his face. But something was different. As we made small talk, his eyes seemed to bore into me, and then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Did someone say something to you about me?" My stomach dropped. I tried my best to stay calm and casually replied, "No, why?" My voice didn't shake, but inside I was screaming. He studied my face for a moment, his eyes narrowing like he didn't quite believe me. But after a long, uncomfortable silence, he just shrugged and walked off, muttering, "Never mind." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, thinking maybe, just maybe, I had gotten away with it. I was wrong. Later that night, I woke up to an eerie feeling, the sensation of someone watching me. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw him, Rob, sitting at the end of my bed. My heart slammed against my chest as he leaned over me, his face inches from mine, and pressed his hand over my mouth. I tried to scream, but it came out as a muffled cry. "Shh," he whispered, his breath hot and suffocating. "Don't believe what they say about me. They're all lying." Panic surged through me as he started caressing my leg, his touch slow and deliberate. I froze for a moment, paralyzed by fear, but then survival kicked in. I yanked his hand away and screamed as loud as I could, throwing myself out of bed and sprinting for the door. Behind me, I could hear Rob yelling, telling me to stop, his footsteps pounding behind me. But I didn't stop. I ran outside into the cold night, my phone clutched tightly in my hand, and immediately dialed 911. I hid in the bushes by the side of the house, my heart racing as I whispered to the dispatcher, explaining everything. Within minutes, the flashing lights of the police lit up the street, and I finally felt a shred of hope. The officers made Rob come outside. He tried to act calm, like this was all some big misunderstanding, but I could see through it. His smile was gone, replaced by that cold, calculating stare I'd seen earlier. I explained the situation to the police, barely able to stop shaking as I spoke. They didn't arrest him. He denied everything, saying I was overreacting. But one of the officers pulled me aside and confirmed what the girl had told me. Rob had been arrested before for harassing other women, but there was never enough evidence to charge him. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted out. The police stayed with me as I packed the last of my things, watching as Rob refunded me the money for the month. I didn't take my eyes off him the entire time, waiting for him to snap. But he didn't. He stood there, cold and quiet, like nothing had happened. Once I had all my stuff loaded into my car, I drove straight to a hotel. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The next morning, I moved into the new apartment, safe, finally safe. I learned my lesson the hard way. I'll never trust a stranger as a roommate again. Never.